All right. Good evening, everyone. I hope I find you well. Anyone to confirm if I'm audible? Am I
Hi,
clearly?
yes, we can hear you.
All right. Thank you very much. Welcome once again to Economics 10B, the macroeconomics part of the subject of economics. All right. So today we just want to continue from where we left. It's still an introduction. We haven't fully engaged into the traveling gear yet. We just want you to feel acclimatized to the subject of someone is writing on my screen. Don't know whether it's me or it's someone else. Okay, so that you can become acclimatized to the subject of economics. So in the previous session, when we presented the subject, we highlighted that when it comes to an economy, we need to be able to measure the performance of an economy. And we looked at the highlight of the 5 macroeconomic objectives that are mainly used in measuring the performance of an economy. And we stated them to be economic growth, secondly, full employment, thirdly, price stability, fourthly, external stability, then fifth, the equitable distribution of income and wealth. And we looked at economic growth, what economic growth is, the various measures that are used in measuring economic growth, and in coming up with the relevant statistics that are then used to define whether we have an economic growth or not. We looked at the GDP metric, we defined what GDP is, etc. So today we just want to delve much more deep into one of the macroeconomic objectives, which is price stability, and try to see where we can find our foothold in that. All right. So as we highlighted in the sessions, that price stability is one of the most important macroeconomic objectives in relation to the performance of an economy, because it measures the price levels within an economy and the stability within these price levels. We understand the functions of the price levels within an economy, that price levels play a significant role in terms of allocation of resources, in terms of the affordability itself, as well as the cost of living within a country is necessitated by the pricing system within a nation. So that makes it a very, very important aspect when it comes to the measuring of the performance of an economy. So by stating price stability, the first thing that we need to understand is we're not saying that the prices should remain constant or should not change from time to time, but we are saying that the general or overall price levels within the economy should generally be stable. That means that they should not be skyrocketing from time to time, but they should be generally be stable. You can have changes maybe in the price of bread, in the price of data, in the price of fuel from time to time, but if you are to look at the overall price levels, it has to be a stable price activity. All right. So in relation to that, we stated again that in terms of the statistics that we need to be operating or to be used for us to be able to operate or to look at these macroeconomic objectives, we get them from the South African Reserve Bank as well as the Stats SA. So one of the primary objectives of the South African Reserve Bank, as highlighted by the Constitution of South Africa, is that the South African Reserve Bank is supposed to protect the value of the currency in the interest of a balanced and sustainable economic growth. We're going to be looking at this one when we look at the monetary topic, which is I think Unit 2 or Unit 3 somewhere there, where we'll be looking at the functions of the Reserve Bank, when it was founded, the activities that it is supposed to be undertaking within an economy. And the major objective of the South African Reserve Bank is to protect the value of the currency in the interest of the balanced and sustainable economic growth of the Republic. So that means that the South African Reserve Bank is supposed to enact policies that ensure that the price levels do not change from time to time. All right. So for us to be able to see, let me try to mute someone here. Okay. For us to be able to see whether we have price stability or not, we have a metric that we used in measuring the price stability aspect of an economy, which is known as inflation or the inflation rate. I'm sure you understand, you've heard about the term inflation more often than not. We're going to be talking about what inflation is. So inflation, by its own definition, refers to the general increase in the price level or in the general price level as indicated by the consumer price index. So the general increase in the general price level is indicated by what we refer to as a consumer price index is what we refer to as inflation. And this inflation has to be a sustained increase. That means that when you're saying that there's inflation, we're not saying that the prices or the price levels have increased maybe slightly, then they reverted back or so. But you're saying that the increase is now sustained. You can pick a trend in relation to the growth of the inflation rate. So that means that when we want to look at inflation, you have to look at it from a considerable period in time for you to determine whether there are price increases that are sustained or not. All right, so for us to be able to measure this inflation rate or this inflation aspect, there are three or more methods that can be used to measure inflation rate within an economy. The first one is what we refer to as the consumer price index. The second one is the GDP deflator. The third one is the producer price index. So all of these three are used in determining the increases in the prices at different aspects within the economy. So the first one, which is the consumer price index, is the most mainly used one in relation to the measuring of the prices within the economy. We're going to be looking at how the consumer price index is measured, as well as the mechanisms that are used in coming up with a consumer price index. Then also the GDP deflator, which basically uses the metric of GDP that we looked at in the previous session, that looks at the differences between the real GDP and the nominal GDP and tries to come up with
Sorry.
Yes.
What does GDP stands for?
All right. GDP refers to gross domestic product. Gross domestic product. So
Thank
if you were
you.
present in the previous session, I'm sure you should be acclimatized to what GDP is. And if you are not, I encourage you to go through the previous session's video so that you get acclimatized to what GDP is.
So just on that subject, we asked James for the recordings for the previous session because some of us weren't able to attend, but it wasn't
Yes.
shared. So if you can just follow up, it would be great. Thank
All right,
you.
it's fine. All right, you're welcome. I will make sure
Thank you
that
so much.
all right. I'll make sure that I'll follow up on James and make sure that he sends the videos as soon as we are done, so that you have all the information in relation to that. But no worries in relation to if you did not manage to understand everything in that session, because when you're going to restart, we are going to look at everything from the beginning to the end of the module. All right, and
I
someone
see
is saying that
says, yeah, it's on the group. So
yeah,
I will just go
it is
back.
now in the.
Sorry, my
All
mistake.
right, okay, it's fine. All
Thank you,
right,
Kagiso.
all right. So I think I'll entertain questions, contributions. I think at the end, so that it doesn't affect my flow. Unless if it is maybe my audio that is not clear, you can highlight. All right. So inflation or the inflation rate refers to the increase in the general price levels as indicated by the consumer price index. And we stated that it is mainly measured using these three methods: the consumer price index, the GDP deflator, also the producer price index. And also there are other methods that can be used in measuring inflation, but we're not going to be looking at them for the purposes of this module. All right, so the first one, which is the consumer price index. The consumer price index measures the monthly changes in the prices paid by the consumers. So we understand that within an economy, as we'll be paying the prices, the measure of the consumer price index records the price levels that are being paid by the participants within an economy in order for them to come up with what we refer to as a consumer price index. So in relation to a consumer price index, there is a process that the States SA, the South African Reserve Bank, goes through before they can come up with that index that they then use to measure inflation rate. So we're going to go through the process, then look at how you can measure inflation using, we're going to give a hypothetical example using that process. So the first thing that they do is that they create what is known as a basket of goods and services which are regarded to be essential goods and services that are consumed by the households, by the normal household or the average households within the nation. And they might give it, maybe it's a family of 5 people that is going to be consuming this particular basket, and the particular goods that they select varies in relation to one economy to the other, but it depends with the economy in question. You'd see some of them, they would be putting elements like electricity, elements like water usage, elements like your data, elements like the bread, elements like maybe the price of cooking oil and the price of fuel, just to make sure that they capture the most important aspects that are required for the survival of an average household. Then after selecting this basket of goods and services, they create various weightings, and these weightings might be based maybe on the time frame in which they are looking at. If it is a weekly time frame, you would say that maybe in relation to bread, this family of 5 is going to be consuming maybe 5 loaves of bread in a week. Maybe in terms of electricity, there is a certain amount of kilowatts that they're expected to be consuming within a particular week. If it is fuel, amount of liters that are used, and obviously they will be determining the costs that are prevailing within the market of these particular goods and services. So we're going to be looking at this particular example. This is a hypothetical example that I just created for learning purposes. It is not a real world example. Of course, there are real world examples that we can apply. We can get them from States SA or from the South African Reserve Bank. You can look at the statistics there. So I just simplified it so that we understand. All right. So this example has, suppose that we are looking at a basket of 3 goods, mainly bread, fuel, and electricity. And we have looked at the quantities that an average family consumes per week. And this quantity can also be referred to as the weighting that is given to these goods or services that are available here. And the prices that we have here, you can see that in 2020 we have the different prices of bread and fuel and electricity. Then in 2021 we have the price per unit or per weight of also bread price and fuel and electricity. So we would want to calculate the total cost of a basket of goods and services. The first thing that we want to calculate first is the total cost of this basket of goods and services per week. How much is the average household going to be consuming in relation to the weekly consumption of bread, the weekly consumption of fuel, the weekly consumption of electricity combined together? What is the total cost of that basket? So you can see that for us to do that, we're going to be multiplying the price per unit times the weighting or the quantity that is going to be consumed by that average family or household during that particular week. So for instance, in 2020, we're going to say the price per loaf of bread was 12 Rand. And that means for the whole week, the family would need 12 times 5 loaves of bread for us to get the total cost of bread. And we're going to be adding on top of that total cost of bread, the total cost of fuel. And in relation to fuel, in 2020, suppose that the fuel was costing 14 Rand per liter, and we're going to be multiplying that 14 Rand per liter times 20 liters for us to get the total amount, the total cost in relation to fuel. Then you're going to be adding it. Then we're going to be having again electricity. electricity 50 kilowatts, that is the weekly consumption, and maybe the price per kilowatt that ESCOM or the municipalities are charging is maybe 3 rand per kilowatt. That means we're going to also be multiplying 3 times 50 for us to get the total consumption of electricity. Then we're going to be adding the total cost of each of those elements to get the total cost of the basket in 2020. All right, so you can see that we have 5 times 12 plus 20 times 14 plus 50 times 3. Then you get a total cost of 490 rand that is over here. So 490 rand is indicating the weekly consumption of this basket by this particular family. All right. Then we do the same again, maybe in 2021. Then in 2021, we can see that the price has changed. Bread is now 15 rand per loaf. Fuel is now 18 rand per liter. Electricity is now 4 rand per kilowatt. So we're also going to be multiplying times the same number of consumption per week of each of those bread, fuel, and electricity. So that means that we're going to be saying 15 times 5 plus 20 times 18 plus 50 times 4, then we get a total cost of that basket to be 635. So these two figures that we have here, 635 and 490, is indicating the weekly cost of the basket of goods and services. So this is the weekly cost of the basket of goods and services. So that means that in each of those successive years, those are the weekly costs that we are incurring, or that an average household is incurring to be able to make ends meet. So when we are here, we haven't done yet. We still want to convert that into an index. So for us to convert that into an index or an index, we're going to be looking at the two price levels that we have. So we're going to suppose, or to give an assumption, and that assumption is that, so we're going to give an assumption. So this is not always the case. So you have to understand that assumptions are not always the case. It depends with a particular set of circumstances that you'll be having. So assuming that 2020 is the year that we're saying that this is the year that we had stable prices, or this is the year that prices did not rapidly change, or the base year that we're going to be basing our inflation calculations on. So we're going to be assuming that 2020 is what we refer to as the base year. So the base year basically is a year that is regarded to as a year in which the prices are stable. So that means that we are not saying that the prices are too expensive. The prices are just generally stable or favorable to a particular household. So if you're going to be using 2020 as our base year, we need to calculate the index, or the index of the base year, and the index of the year that we want to measure. So for the index of the base year, which is 2020, for us to calculate the CPI, or the consumer price index that we're going to be using, we're going to be saying the current price level, or rather the cost of the basket of goods and services divided by the base year price level, or rather the cost of the basket of goods and services during the base year. All right, so the current price levels is indicating the year in which you are measuring your basket of goods and services. So in other words, you can say that that current price level is the cost of the basket in the current year. Then we have the cost of the basket in the base year. Then we multiply that by 100. All right, so in 2020, we are now looking at 2020. So that means that the current year that you're talking about in 2020 would be 2020 cost, the cost of the basket in 2020, which we calculated earlier on to be 490. So in 2020, obviously, the cost would be 490. The cost of the current year would be 490, and the cost of the basket in the base year, which is the same 2020, would be 490. So 490 over 490 times 100, you get it to be your index to be 100. So that means that in 2020, or rather in the base year, normally you usually have the index to be 100. This is just the normal assumption. Then in 2021, the price levels changed to 635. So 635 is now the current cost of the basket in the current year. So that means we're going to be saying 635 divided by 490 times 100 for us to get the index of 129.59. So these indices that we have now are the ones that we use to calculate the inflation rate. So for us to calculate the inflation rate, you're going to be saying, or rather to be using this formula, current year's consumer price index minus previous year's consumer price index divided by the previous year's consumer price index times 100. So the current year's consumer price index is 129.59, and the previous year's is 100. So that means we're going to be saying 129.59 minus 100 divided by 100 times 100 for us to get a percentage. And if you do that, that means that you get a percentage of inflation rate of 29.59. All right, I'll stop here and I'll open for questions. I know this what I've said here, some might have got it, some might not have gotten it. So for now, before we get on to the GDP deflator, if you have any questions in relation to what I've explained or something that you didn't understand, please highlight so that I can explain it. So that is how the inflation rate is calculated using the consumer price index. Is it understood? Or should I repeat it again? All right, so it seems as if it's clear. All right, so this is a very examinable point of your exams. You might be required to calculate the inflation rate. So sometimes they might give you a basket of goods and services and their prices and their weightings. So you need to have an understanding of how to calculate it from that perspective. And sometimes, or rather most of the times, they give you these indices, which you're supposed to be using to calculate the inflation rate from time to time. So you'd see that it differs maybe with the type of question that you might meet in your exam. You might be required to calculate the inflation rate from the basis of the cost of the goods and services, or rather from the given consumer price index or indices at that particular juncture. So you should be able to do both of them. All right, so that is how you calculate your inflation rate. Then we move on to the second method, that is the GDP deflator. So with the GDP deflator, it is mainly used, or rather it mainly uses the GDP metric, GDP, which we refer to as the gross domestic product, which we referred to as the value of the goods and services that that have been produced within a nation. So we looked at the GDP metric in the previous session, how to calculate the gross domestic product, etc. So in that, again, we looked at the differences between what we refer to as nominal GDP and real GDP. So with nominal GDP, we stated that this is gross domestic product that is expressed at the current price levels. That means that you just multiply the value of the production times the current price levels, then you get what we refer to as the nominal GDP. And we also looked at the real GDP, where we say that the real GDP refers to the gross domestic product that is calculated at constant prices, or rather at a certain base year price level that is used maybe in the past, in which we say that the price level was maybe supposedly stable. So we highlighted the differences between nominal GDP and real GDP, and we say that the problem with nominal GDP is that it does not take the inflation aspect into account, because it assumes that any growth in the GDP is as a result of the increases in production, yet at times it's not the case. It might be as a result of the increases in prices, which will then affect the the valuation of the gross domestic product. So for us to calculate the GDP deflator, we use the following format, which states that nominal GDP divided by real GDP times 100. So what you get there is what we refer to as the implicit price deflator, which measures the changes in the goods and services purchased by consumers and businesses and governments, as well as the elements, all the elements within a particular economy. So the difference between a consumer price index and the GDP deflator is that the GDP deflator takes into account the total prices that consumers are going to be paying, businesses are going to be paying, without subcategorizing certain elements which might be regarded as luxurious, etc. Remember, the consumer price index only takes what the those that are taking the statistics people that are what they are deeming to be the most important in relation to the essential aspects. But the GDP deflator looks at the overall price levels within the economy, and it comes up with the implicit price deflator. So for us to calculate it, you would be given, suppose that you're given your nominal GDP is 750 trillion and your real GDP is 550. You simply divide 750 by 550, then you get what we refer to as the GDP deflator, which is in this case, if you're going to be saying 750 divided by 550, you're going to be getting a figure of 1.36. So this is representative of the implicit price deflator. All right, so suppose that you are given the base year. Obviously, we looked at it. Base year usually is 100. If you're going to be subtracting it in percentage terms after multiplying it by 100, you get the percentage increases in inflation. At this rate, it would be 36%, because you're going to be saying minus 100 or minus a 1 for you to get the percentage terms. So that is how you calculate inflation from a GDP deflator perspective and from the consumer price index perspective. So the chart that is on your screen provided by the World Bank is indicating the changes in the price levels as indicated by the GDP deflator. So that means that this is the percentage changes in the overall price levels that were experienced in South Africa since the year 1980, 1970, I think 1970 or 1960, somewhere there, to the year 2020. So you can see that the price levels were changing up and down, and we're having a high in 1980. So you can see that in 1980, the GDP deflator is indicating a percentage of around 23% in relation to inflation of prices. So a question might come which might want you to interpret what that increase is meaning to the rest of the economy. What does that mean to the rest of the economy? So that means that production is 23% of it includes inflation. The value of the production, 23% of it includes inflation. Whenever we're having the GDP deflator going upwards, and it's going to be eating up the value of the nominal gross domestic product. All right, so that brings us to the end in relation to the two methods that we mainly used, or that we mainly use in measuring inflation. We want to look at the causes of inflation. What is it that caused this inflation that we've been talking about? Because once you've measured it, you need to look at one of the reasons that results in the inflation to be what it is. So from an economics perspective, there are two main causes or two main schools of thoughts that are used in describing this inflation. We have the first one, which is the demand pull school of thought, or demand pull inflation, which basically highlights the cause of inflation from a monetary perspective. By that we mean that inflation will be defined by the pull of the demand, or the increases of the demand being greater than the supply available, which at the end would result in price increases. So whenever we have aggregate demand increasing beyond aggregate supply, it means that we're going to be experiencing demand pull inflation. And usually this occurs as a result of too much money within the economy, too much money in circulation within the economy, which results in people having access to goods and services beyond the sustainable available amounts of goods and services. And hence, as a result, there will be competition for the consumption of those same goods and services, resulting in inflation within the economy. So we're going to be looking at the graphs that we have here. The graph that you're looking at your screen here is what is referred to as the demand pull inflation graph, which basically is highlighted by the combination of the aggregate demand graphs and the aggregate supply graphs. So we're going to be looking at aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So aggregate demand refers to the demand within the total demand within a particular economy, and aggregate supply refers to the total supply or production within that particular economy. So aggregate demand, in the previous session when we were looking at GDP, we looked at the main components that are used in measuring the spending aspect of the GDP. If you're going to be looking at how you measure GDP using the expenditure method, we say that it's going to be measured as a summation of the consumption expenditure, investment spending, government spending, as well as the net foreign spending. So the summation of those spendings result in what we refer to as GDP, or rather sums up to what we refer to as GDP from the expenditure method. So that is the same in relation to aggregate demand, because the expenditure within the economy, or the aggregate expenditure within the economy, is the same as the aggregate demand. So here aggregate expenditure would be equating to aggregate demand, equating to the consumption by households, investment spending by firms, government spending by the government, foreign sector spending, net foreign sector spending within the economy. So the sum of these give us what we refer to as aggregate demand. So if you look at some of the reasons which results in aggregate demand growing beyond sustainable levels, you look at elements like access to credit, increases in people's incomes, etc. So when people have much access to income, or much access to money in general, which is provided by the financial institutions through the form of credits, etc., it results in aggregate demand increasing. And it might increase to a certain point where aggregate supply cannot sustain that further increase. So you can see that from AD1 here, AD2, AD3, there are increases in aggregate demand that are successively followed by a sustainable supply curve, meaning that supply is able to stretch up until we get to AD3 here, meaning that production is also increasing as aggregate demand is increasing. But beyond AD3 there, you can see that aggregate demand is increasing, but there is no increases in production. Aggregate supply is no longer increasing. That indicates the supply curve in the long run, which is rather perfectly elastic, meaning inelastic, meaning that there is no more space or excess capacity for firms to continuously produce because of limitations within the economy. So, and hence, as a result, that means that any increases in aggregate demand would result in increases in the price levels rather than increases in the total production or income within the economy. So that increase in the price levels without any increase in income within an economy is what is resulting now in what we refer to as demand pull inflation. So this particular type of inflation is the one that we're experiencing soon after the COVID-19 pandemic. Soon after the COVID-19 pandemic, before we started looking at Russia, etc., we started having inflation rate increasing And the inflationary pressures, if you look at the last quarter of last year was 2021, the last quarter of 2021, we started having inflationary pressures kicking in. If you are to look at especially the news that were trending in 2021 towards the end of 2021, you would see that the price levels were increasing without any sustainable increases in production, and hence there was a sustained increase in the price levels. Bit by bit, inflation was creeping in. And in countries like the US, you were hearing the Federal Reserve making changes in their policies in order for them to try to counter this inflation in one way or the other. So that was the result of what was referred to as an expansionary monetary policy, whereby the interest rates were reduced to, in the United States, they were reduced, I think, to 0% in order for the COVID-19 problems that were there to be accommodated. And in South Africa, I think the interest rate was reduced to 4.25%, if I'm not mistaken. The same applies with the LIBOR rate, London Interbank Rate. It was also reduced in the UK in order to capture the COVID effects. So hence, as a result, that in the long term had an effect of expanding the aggregate demand beyond the sustainable levels of the aggregate demand, hence resulting in inflationary pressures. So we're going to be looking at, when you're looking at the macroeconomic theory and policy, how the South African Reserve Bank can react in relation to such a sustained increase in aggregate demand, which is beyond aggregate supply capacities. So you can see that in relation to the reactions that can be used on a demand pull inflation, in 2022, in March, we started realizing, especially in South Africa, the South African Reserve Bank started talking about increasing interest rates, and people were wondering, why are interest rates being increased? Yet there is information that was in the background of these that only economists are only privy to, that the rest of the public might not understand why they were introducing increases in interest rates. So this highlights again the other plus that you're getting from learning this type of a module. All right, so you'd see that they started increasing the interest rates by 0.25%. From there, they increased it to 6%, somewhere there. I don't know where it is currently, between 6 to 7%, somewhere there. This is enacted in order to reduce the too much money that is chasing the too few goods within the economy, which is as a result of the expansion activities that were enacted during the COVID-19 pandemic, which resulted in the economy overheating. So hence the interest rates increases to curb this aggregate demand increasing beyond sustainable levels. So hence credit would no longer be as cheap as it was, and people are going to be cutting back on consumption, people are going to be cutting back on borrowing, etc. So hence that means that in the long run, it's going to result in this aggregate demand falling to sustainable levels, and hence the price levels will be falling. That is the goal. I don't know whether they're going to be achieving that goal or not. That is an argument for another day. All right, so that is it with demand pull inflation. Then we look at the second aspect, which is cost push inflation. So cost push inflation is that type of inflation that occurs as a result of increases in the costs of production. It might be as a result of increases in cost of production or limitations in the supply chain. So you'd see that this particular one, we experienced it when I don't want to talk about the COVID-19, of course. The COVID-19 had some elements of it, but we mainly saw this when Russia invaded Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war resulted in cost push inflation increasing because the Russian economy, which was then sanctioned, was the main supplier of gas, the main supplier of Ukraine was the main supplier of wheat, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I think in relation to oil as well, it had an impact because some of the oil that we transported en route to the rest of the world were using some of the routes that were affected by that war, and hence as a result we started having these cost push inflation effect kicking in, where you would see the price of gas going up, the price of fuel going up, the price of wheat and bread going up because of the shortages in the aggregate supply that was available. So you'd see that this is indicated by a leftward shift in the aggregate supply curve, which results in a reduction in production and an increase in the price levels, and hence it becomes inflationary. So this particular one is difficult to control, or rather to bring down, because of its nature. Prices are increasing, production is reducing, which means we're having unemployment and inflation increasing at the same time. We're going to be looking at the Phillips curve, which highlights the increases in unemployment and inflation at the same time, which makes it difficult for especially the South African Reserve Bank to use any policies in relation to the solving of a cost push inflation. And also the fiscal aspect would be difficult in relation to controlling the aspect of cost push inflation. So the best method that they try to use is what they refer to as the incomes policy. We're going to be looking at the incomes policy when we look at the subject of inflation in greater detail later on. But these are the two main causes of inflation within an economy. I don't know if you have any questions in relation to the whole presentation of today, or if you have any other question before we close. I think this is what I wanted to present. Any questions? Anywhere you want to be highlighted? We've looked at price stability. So I looked at price stability in greater detail. I looked at it from the measuring of it as a macroeconomic objective. Then I looked at it in terms of the calculations, as well as going deeper to the connected areas of inflation. We're going to be looking at inflation as a subject on its own, but this is a major highlight that I've given here of the subject of inflation. All right, it seems as if you don't have any questions, so that means I can ask you questions. All right, so these questions are mainly to trigger your mind a little bit and just to refresh a little bit. So the first question that I have is, the consumer price index is a key measure that helps to calculate. Then we have the possible answers: net exports, inflation rate, the gross domestic product, the unemployment rate, the net exports. I'm seeking answers from you. The consumer price index, is a key measure that helps to calculate. What is the possible answer from net exports, the inflation rate, gross domestic product, the unemployment rate? Yes.
The inflation rate, the
Inflation
unemployment rate.
That's correct. No, not unemployment rate.
Okay.
All right.
And
The
then,
answer that we're looking for, someone is saying, yes, go on.
oh, maybe the gross domestic. No, but that's used to, yeah. No, that's used in together. No, but okay, also that's the what did you calculate it further? Okay, I would say the inflation rate and the gross domestic product.
All right. You got one correct, then you got the other one wrong. The answer that
Okay.
we're looking for, there is only inflation rate. The consumer price index is a key measure that helps to calculate the inflation rate. It doesn't measure the gross domestic product. It doesn't measure unemployment. It doesn't measure imports or net exports. It only measures inflation rate. Recall the calculations that I did. It was only for the inflation rate, not the gross domestic product. So the answer we're looking for there is the inflation rate. Then which of the
So I'm
following
looking
is
at
not one of
possible
the
answers, not possible answer, but
Oh, okay.
okay. Tricky one.
Yes. All right. Which one of the following is not of the three main causes of inflation? Which one of the following is not of the three main causes of inflation? I talked about two. Here we're being introduced to a third one. Which one of the following is not of the three main causes of inflation rate? So you're supposed to pick the wrong answer, not the correct answer. The odd one out, rather, not the wrong answer. The odd one out. You're supposed to pick the odd one out. Which one of the following is the three main causes of inflation rate?
Which one of the following is not built-in inflation?
Built-in inflation. Okay. Anyone else with a different thought?
I would say hyperinflation. I'm correct.
Hyperinflation. Somebody raised their hand. I can't see their name. Or if they've spoken. Someone has raised hand. Let me see. Maybe they've spoken. All right. Or their audio is not connected. Someone with an unconnected audio, you can type on the chat. All right, so the answer that we're looking for there, let me see. Okay, so the answer that we're looking for there is hyperinflation, because hyperinflation is a type of inflation that occurs. It basically talks about the speed at which the inflation rate is occurring at, and it is not a cause of inflation. So it's different from demand pull. Demand pull is so obvious, we talked about it. Cost push, we talked about it. Now with built-in inflation, it's a hybrid of both the demand pull and the cost push inflation. So basically they are talking about it as a cause of inflation. So the answer that we're looking for there is hyperinflation. All right, I think that sums up for today. I don't know if you have any other questions that you might be having before we close
Yes, I have one,
this
please.
session. Sorry?
Yes, I have one, if I may ask.
Yes, go on.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so in terms of the classes, so when we now going to proceed with the classes, when we decide, is it going to work exactly the same as ECO10A, where James assisted us with the assignment and exam preparation? Is this the same?
All right, you're asking about when are we going to be doing the assignment?
No, not when. Are you going to do the assignment with us and exam preparation if we proceed with the classes?
Yes, it's part of the whole package. We're going to be going through the assignment. We're going to go through the exam preparation and the theory as well, the theory tutorials as well. So would want to start on the assignment. I saw it was due on the 26th of September. So we'd want to start it at least 3 weeks earlier, 2-3 weeks earlier, so that you have time to compile it on your own, since you're supposed to be individually compiling it. Yeah. So we're going to be looking at the assignment. We're also going to be looking at the exam preparation. Plus,
but will you assist us like James did in full?
You mean the assignment?
Yeah.
Yes, we're going to be doing it in full. We are going to be looking at each question, presenting the possible answers that are required for each question until we conclude that whole assignment question paper.
Okay, because the cool thing is what I've learned in ECO10A is that when you go through us and help us with the answers, you actually learn from it, where they don't give you the answers to the assignment, so you don't know really what you have done wrong. So
Okay.
that's why I
Yeah.
like this classes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
okay.
That's the plus of going this route. It's
Yeah.
different from just getting the answers without them being explained.
Wondering. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Thanks.
Another person?
Fortune, I just wanted to know, the session that we did now, on what
Yes.
page is the session on in the
On the
text,
study guide.
the study guide textbook? Yeah.
All right. Which textbook are you using?
I'm using economics, the 6th edition.
I mean, the name of the author, is it More and
Philip
Associates?
Moore, yeah.
So?
Philip Moore.
Yeah. All right. So, in relation to Philip Moore, let me see if I can get the textbook here. I can't remember the textbook page per se.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember the textbook page per se.
It's fine. You can just maybe put it on the group on a later stage. I can just like read it through and make a
All
note
right.
of
All right.
if possible.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'll check on it. Then I'll let you know on the. I'll make sure James let you know on the group in
Yeah.
relation to that. All right. Anyone else with a different question? Okay, so that means no more questions. Everything is clear. So that sums it up for today. We have started the month of August. I would now want from now for us to proceed into the actual classes for those that are going to be joining us, so that we are no longer going to be wasting time, since we have a lot of things that we need to cover in this small space of time. I don't know. Do you know when you are writing your exams, so that we know how much time will be in
November.
November? You do not have the particular date.
Oh no, I don't.
All right. Anyway, it's fine, because we expect that the whole of August, the whole of September, the whole of October, I think that
We
should
are
be fine.
writing on the 7th of November.
7th of November. I think that's
7th of November from 9
all
to
right.
12.
All right. I think that is ample time for us to cover everything, because your module is quite lengthy and it has a lot of things that needs to be covered. Some of it you need to be practicing on your own, especially the mathematical aspects when we're looking at unit 7, etc. All right, so I think for today we can call it a day. Thank you very much. Until we meet again next week on Thursday again. It's still Thursday for now, until we deliberate on it. For those that are going to be joining us, I have a pleasant evening until we meet again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.